Welcome to this episode of Mosaic Days, where we talk about all things education, including student achievement and outcomes, professional development and training, and preparation, planning, and definitely not predetermination. I am your co-host, Leonard Martinez.
And I'm Allison Smith.
And what do we have on our agenda for today?
So today we are actually doing the first of a three-part series. I like these three-part series. And we're going to be talking about all things having to do with IEPs, but specifically for this one, it's how to prepare for an IEP and get ready for that IEP.
And we're talking about the most challenging IEPs, right?
The most challenging IEPs.
Because your typical annual IEP, that's I would say low maintenance. We're good to go with those. We're talking about, I hate to use the phrase, but unfortunately, that's the one that sticks with us throughout our years. High profile IEP specifically.
High profile IEPs or difficult IEPs where there's a lot of information to kind of figure out. There's parent involvement. There's, this is a kid who maybe is just first getting found eligible for special education and what that means for parents, or it's for a kid that has been there for a while and you know that this is going to be, I don't want to say loaded, but there's going to be some challenges maybe that you can anticipate.
So there are things we can do to get ready for this IEP. Yep. And it looks different at different levels, right? And you mentioned when I did early start assessment back in the day, and we're talking about our little kiddos and the parents come in and they're really either they're prepared and they come with binders of information, or this is the first time they've heard anything about special ed. And at that age level, we see parents, have emotions showing and tears and confusion. And so we need to make sure that we're taking an approach that is thoughtful, that's kind, that's empathetic, especially at those younger levels. I mean, we really should be doing it throughout, but especially at those younger levels where parents are hearing that the kid has a disability for the first time. That might not be an easy thing to do. So whatever we could do to comfort parents and try to get them to understand. I feel at times, on one hand, we're talking about a very formal process with formal terms and scores that are really can be overwhelming to parents. On the other hand, we want to make sure that we communicate objectively, tactfully, what are some of the concerns that we see through assessment and through data.
Well, and again, this has to do with remembering that it's not a personal thing, that this is parents are coming, like you said, this is sometimes the first time that they've heard this. Parents, they know what's going on with their kids. So many of them, they've sought help. They're at their wits' end. They don't know how to support their kid at home. They don't know why their kid is struggling. So they've had a lot of concerns for some time. And this is going to be, especially for initials, the first time that they actually hear, yes, we're finding your child eligible for special education. And so with that, once they get kind of that clarity, I think there's also now I don't know what's next. And
what does this mean?
What does this mean? What's next? What does this mean for my child and how it's going to impact them, moving forward? And so I think our job is to walk in there and be really supportive and really prepared. And the better prepared we are, the more supportive I think we can be for our parents. And
so we're doing this as a 3-part series. Today, we're focusing on preparation, before the meeting, what should happen before the meeting. And I looked at it through the lens of, we have some difficult meetings where there may be some disagreements between staff. And not just between staff and parent, which typically what we see when we have these meetings, but oftentimes there's some conflict between staff. So trying to get everyone on the same page to understand the student needs drive the conversation, right? Yeah. And sometimes people come with their own agenda that might be differ from the team's agenda. So we want to make sure we have this meeting. Back in the day, we used to call it staffings. I know you hadn't heard that term before, but that's a term I've always become familiar with in LUSD and Montebello is staffing. We're going to meet before, and we are going to inform staff on what steps need to be taken to prepare for this meeting.
Yeah, and so a lot of times people are like, well, you can't meet ahead of time. You can't, So that big term that you used at the very beginning, predetermination. That is something that we hear consistently, especially when we are dealing with legal issues around IEPs, is this notion of predetermining the outcome of the meeting. And so a lot of people will be like, well, we can't meet ahead of time. So let's talk about what is your experience with this quote unquote staffing? What does that look like so that we can ensure that it is not predetermination? Because predetermination is when we get into problems.
Yeah, and OAH, Office of Administrative Hearings, is pretty clear on this when you take a look at some of the decisions that have been released from them. The team is allowed to meet ahead of time. So first and foremost, let's dispel the notion that the team cannot meet ahead of time. Absolutely, the team can meet ahead of time to talk about preparation, talk about roles, which we're going to get into in a second. So we're completely allowed to have these staffings ahead of difficult meetings to develop a process in which to have this IEP meeting. So, when I do staffings, and I've done them for I don't know how many hundreds of times I've done these staffings, for my take, it's really just a review of the process. And so I want to make sure that I am not influencing team members to make decisions. Again, you're probably going to hear the word predetermination a bunch throughout these three episodes, because you're not supposed to go in there and say you're going to offer this.
Yes.
And again, typically these are if they're really going to be the potential for concerns, that the potential for adversarial meeting, then we want to make sure that we inform. So typically, this is where someone from the district office shows up to facilitate the staffing. And what I've done was, it's a review of the process. You must have data to move this conversation forward, to talk about goals and services and needs, and ultimately what the offer of FAPE is. So for me, it's a reminder of what the process is, to take a look at the entire continuum. We don't break off like, oh, okay, for this meeting, this is your continuum. No. We take a look at the continuum in its entirety and what data they need to collect to support any decision. So it's not, district office should not go into these meetings and influence what that path may look like. And I will be honest with you, I've been a part of IEP meetings where the determination has been made already. Yeah. And I've been on the opposite side, and it really is a bad feeling. It doesn't feel good to be on the opposite side, and there's a team there, and they're saying, okay, we hear what you're saying, but this is what we're going to offer. I'm like, wait a second, you just shortcutted the process, and this isn't really appropriate to not involve the parent. So to be clear, the team can meet. The team can, when we're going to go through this, so I'm kind of jumping the gun here, but the team can meet to prepare and to plan. They may not predetermine what the offer of FAPE is prior to that meeting.
So, and one of the things I want to talk about is this notion of district office coming into that meeting. So the minute that you and I step into a meeting, they're immediately turning to us to say, what does district office offer? So that is a fine line that I think if you are holding these staffings, because you can hold them without district office, you can hold them just as your LEA rep or your principal, vice principal, assistant principal, or bringing the team together just to review data so everyone's on the same page. But this idea that district office is going to come in and tell that team what to do, that's where it gets really tricky. And I think a lot of times that's what's happening is the team doesn't know what to do, and they're looking at you or me to say, this is the decision of what is going to happen in this case.
So let's go through some of our notes that we have here. The purpose for me is to take a look at what challenges may come up. I am big on troubleshooting potential challenges. So taking a look at where could it go wrong?
Yep.
What concerns may the parent have? Do you have the data to answer those? Really take a look at what the challenges may come up. Like I said, when I've been involved, it's typically as a district office rep, reviewing the process, informed decision making. You and I have been working long enough to know that calibration and informed decision making is big on my agenda on what to push with this. Similarly, if we attend the staffing, I'm a firm believer that district office reps shouldn't be in attendance in IEP meetings. As a program specialist back in the day, I attended hundreds of meetings as a district office rep. And inevitably, I feel that taints the process. Inevitably, when it's a contentious IEP, after we're done, everyone looks at me and says, what do you want to offer?
Yeah. Well, again, that's another example of like, it turns on you of like, you're making the ultimate decision and you don't even really know this kid.
Yeah. I think, honestly, my opinion, I think that's probably a violation of FAPE. I think when district office gets involved and does more than facilitate, because I also have been in those meetings where I'm just purely a facilitator. And if if we're trying to get people's opinions on what might be an offer, I typically tend to shy away from those, saying I'm here to facilitate. I really don't have an opinion on this, so I'm going to let you guys have that conversation. And my job is to keep the process moving along. Really don't want to give too much input. Again, I don't know the kid. Only time I'm looking at this is the first time I'm seeing the data. So I try to stay out of that. And look at it this way. If the district office is there, it really kind of truncates the process in that if there is disagreement, which we'll talk about in the next episode, there's a dispute resolution process that needs to occur. Typically, that is with district office.
Yes.
So if I'm in that IEP meeting, then I can't participate in dispute resolution afterwards. So I think in my current day job, we've done a really good job of building capacity with our teams and our LEA reps to keep us out of those meetings. And there are times where we do have to attend, but for the majority, stay away from those meetings so that we can look at troubleshooting that before and after that meeting.
Well, and I think, that's all about building capacity. It's about building knowledge so that the teams know that they can walk in there and make some of these decisions without, the higher ups coming in. The reality is it's like when you start doing staffing with school sites, you're not doing staffing all the time with school sites because the majority of the time they're doing this without district office. And that's ultimately what you want, is you want them to come together and understand this is the process. Everybody needs to know the data, gather the data so that we can come to informed database decisions at that meeting. The issue comes when everybody is coming to the table and they don't even know the kid. They don't know what's going on with the kid. They don't know areas of weakness or areas of strength. And then they're coming together to make these decisions. That becomes really difficult for that team to actually move forward with a positive solution. And then sometimes it does sound like predetermination because it's just the psychologist doing it. And everyone's like, I agree with that psychologist. Or, the service provider, I agree with the service provider. And they don't really have that knowledge of what the data shows. And so, it's important that when you do staffing like this, you can review the data. But the thing with predetermination is you shouldn't be forming an opinion until everybody comes to the table, because the whole idea of the parent having that input in the process, you have to be able to say that. And that's what OAH says. You can come together and you can meet ahead of time, but that parent still has to have the ability to provide their input and to be a member of that team.
Yeah. And I'll use their phrase. You can't do a take it or leave it offer on the table. Yep. It does have it does have indications of predetermination. What you said, something important, make sure you invite relevant staff members who know the kid. We always see the mistake of inviting a general ed teacher to an IEP meeting who has the kid for an elective class with 150 kids. I don't know the kid. You really want to try to invite, especially if the kid's struggling in a core class, you really want to try to invite that general ed teacher so they can give some input as to why they think that kid may be struggling. It does come into that conversation about accommodations, which we'll talk about probably in the next episode, but we really do want to try to get people that have some familiarity with the kid academically.
Yeah. And, just in general, you want to make sure that everybody is on the same page, right? So what we talk about inviting important people, you're also inviting, making sure that there's translation services, making sure that you have, clearly defined roles of who is doing what in those meetings, who is the note taker, who is that. And usually that's like a school-wide situation where, they'll say the psychologist is the LEA rep or the assistant principal is the LEA rep. But you want to make sure that you have those correct roles and make sure that everybody is coming to the table knowing what their responsibility is. Plus, you have the support for the parents. So if they need the translation services or they need, the service provider, and you're going to be, potentially discussing services and whether or not we reduce or we increase, you want to make sure that that service provider is there for the whole time to be able to have those conversations with the parent as well.
Yeah, and bring data. I mean, you have to discuss data, and I'm talking about the psycho-ed evaluation, the data from that. I'm talking about academic data. If it's an initial or a try, there probably is some standardized assessments that you did for that evaluation. But also bring work samples. I think this is I think we kind of get lost up. I think we tend to get focused too much on those Woodcock-Johnson scores or those KTEA scores. And I always caution people with those interpretations. And we've had this conversation a bunch, where those are one snapshot in time that might not indicate the kid's ability to perform in a classroom setting. So bring those work samples. I would love to see at every IEP meeting, the case carrier bring a portfolio of work. This is what your kid did independently. The strengths are this. I mean, we forget that. To me, and it sounds a little corny, but IEPs are supposed to be celebratory. This is the growth that your kids exhibited for a year. And I think at times, unfortunately, we use that meaning because we have everybody in the room to complain about kids' behavior.
Yeah.
And so I've been in a number of those IEP meetings where I'm like, hang on, let's take a pause here. We're not here we're not here to just, say derogatory things about kids. And I see it from parents and I see it from teachers. This isn't the point of this. We're here to talk about gains, and we can talk about concerns, absolutely, but we want to highlight growth and we want to highlight what the kid is doing right. And make sure that we have the data to support that.
And we want to make sure that the parent has that input in there. So it's important that we actually ask that parent what the strengths are at home as well. That's all a part of involving them in the process and getting that input for them, because it makes a more well-rounded data collection if you have both strengths and also areas of concern for that parent as well. So you definitely want to do some of that prep ahead of time. Now, what is your thinking of providing assessments ahead of time or assessment reports ahead of time?
It's not what I think. It's what Ed Code says. And Ed Code says that the reports are available. The parents can have those reports. If they're not available, then they're not available. So we know, unfortunately, with the workload with some of our staff members, getting those reports done in a timely manner may not be the easiest thing. So again, if the reports are available ahead of time, the parent can have access to those reports. If they're not, they don't. So we're talking about contentious IEPs, right? Some parents will say, well, if I don't have the report, then we need to push back the IEP date, in which they technically are entitled to do. So you kind of have to fill out, are you going to have that meeting?
Yeah.
If it's that type of meeting, then you probably want to talk to your staff members and say, hey, have those reports ready to go. And they need to be ready 3 to 5 days in advance so the parent can have access to those. But technically it doesn't have to be done that way. But again, we're trying to do good faith, right? We're talking about these IEP meetings where the parent may feel like they can't trust the district over a variety of years of having the district, in their opinion, fail their kid. So you have to kind of fill out what those relationships are. And is this a parent that wants a report ahead of time? Because there are parents that they're going to want the report ahead of time. Get it done ahead of time. Give it to the parent 3 days in advance. Let them take a look at it. Yeah. Be prepared to defend it. Be prepared to explain it. I mean, again, that goes back to the whole ask for independent evaluation. You have to make sure that assessment is valid, is solid, and if the parent feels that it's not, then that might lead to some costly IEEs down the line. So you know who those parents are. They ask for IEEs regularly, so make sure you have an airtight assessment.
Well, and that it goes back to building relationships, right? If you know that this parent is going to be an issue, then like you said, you want to prepare it ahead of time. Because what's going to happen with those parents who maybe need a little more processing time, just because they really want to go through it with a fine tooth comb, or they have a relative that, is helping support them with this process, they want to look at that ahead of time. Oftentimes we sit there and we just feed them information, especially for initial. This is the first time they're hearing this, they're getting bombarded by just all these technical terms, and as much as I would like to think that school site teams are trying to be as parent friendly with their language, there are a lot of technical terms that we don't even realize that we're saying because we're all educators, we're all at the table, we're all IEP knowledgeable, that these parents don't understand. And so that if there is going to be a parent who has shown you, anxiety around their child or concerns or has been expressive of different areas of concern with their child, that is a person that you want to prepare ahead of time. The issue comes when you get to that meeting and you're sharing out on assessment results and the parent has nothing to look at.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure that those, in my opinion, you want to make sure that those evaluations are done the day of the meeting. So even if you're not giving it to them ahead of time, they have something to look at in terms of the data.
And we know sometimes the reports aren't done at the meeting and they're done afterwards. That practice has got to stop. There should be a completed report or at least a drafted report done ahead of the meeting that's ready to be presented at the meeting. And so you got to talk to your staff members, right? I'm a big fan of projecting the documents so that everyone can take a look at the same thing, with kind of like the friendly environmental waste of paper that we do, printouts of 30 pages for every staff member. I'm a big fan of just projecting it. Let everyone see the report on a projector. So, but you bring up a good point. We're talking about analysis of scores. Move away from grade equivalence and age equivalence. I can't I can't imagine in this time that we're still presenting age equivalent and grade equivalent versus standard score, and having the bell curve to explain the parent, which is really easy to see on a standard curve, on a norm curve, where that kid where those scores fall. So again, need to move away from grade equivalence and age equivalence and look at showing the parent standard scores. it's also more user friendly, right?
Yeah.
No one wants to hear that their kid who's in the 9th grade is reading at a 3rd grade level. So when we start saying this is where your kid's at, and your kid's 6th grades behind in reading on a test that might not accurately represent that kid's ability to read, is off-putting to parents.
Well, and it's one snapshot, right? It's one section of the Woodcock Johnson that's determined that it is 3rd grade. And so that child may not even be at the 3rd grade level, but that one subtest that they did is showing them 3rd grade level, right?
Yeah.
So, ultimately we want to make sure that, like you said, it is user friendly, that parents are getting the right information. I've had parents heartbroken because they've seen that grade equivalent or that age equivalent where they think that their kid is 5 years old and they're in high school, and that is not an accurate depiction. And so, definitely want to get rid of that. Let's talk about draft portions of the IEP. So a lot of case managers are nervous. Like, if I go through and I do the entire draft of the IEP, then that's predetermination. I'm basically putting in there. So, like what I've determined that is going to be the idea for this.
You may absolutely draft portions of the IEP ahead of time. It's completely permissible by OH. So again, the thing that drives me and should drive every staff member in a district is OAH decisions, right? And district office really should be keep aware of as the decisions are released and reading through those so they can learn from other missteps or reinforced practices that they're doing. And one of the things is that you can absolutely draft an IEP ahead of time. I would be cautious about FAPEs and leaving those maybe blank, but you could still say, hey, this was the offer previously, so that this can continue to be the offer. And as we discuss data, there might be some shifts to that. So it's permissible. Again, the logic is this is not set in stone. You got to come with an open mind as you listen to data to make changes to that offer of FAPE, make changes to goals, make changes to services based on team input. And so when we again, kind of going back to LRE, what is the least amount of support that the kid requires to access his education? That's really what we're trying to determine here. And so we will need to make sure that we prepare our staff members to have those conversations with parents. And also, if they don't have data to support a decision, be for front load them on, if you don't have the information, then say we're going to either respond in writing or we're going to need to do some additional assessment. So teams need to be aware that if they don't have data, it's okay to say no right now. At this point in time, no. We need to collect more data. They need to know that ahead of time. And I think the biggest request we get is for like a paraprofessional assigned to a student.
One-to-one,
And we may not have that data. So we're not saying yes, we're not saying no, but people need to be front loaded ahead of time. If a parent makes any request for service and we don't have the data to support a decision one way or another, then we should be okay with saying, we don't know, but we probably need to collect some more data.
Yeah. And I think, having that draft ahead of time just makes the meeting go more smoothly. If you don't have anything done and you're sitting there filling out every single form,
meeting.
We're on form number 2, let's talk about present levels. The reality is especially when you talk about present levels, you've gathered all that information ahead of time. That's just reporting out on where that child is. You can absolutely fill out all of that. And if you're really hesitant on portions of the IEP, like you said, maybe the services or the offer of FAPE, there's always the draft watermark that you put on your paper, which in good faith is like, this is a draft and we're going to go through it and we're going to fix it with the notion that you are going to fix it and then provide parents with the updated copy after you get their input, take off that watermark. But, you can walk in there. That's a technical thing in all the programs. At least in SACE, I don't know about Willigent. I'm assuming Willigent also does a draft of some sort where you stamp a draft or write draft at the top of the copy, but have that paperwork prepared, because if you're a case manager walking in there and you have nothing done, you're just going to be fumbling and that's just going to cause extra problems with the meeting.
Yeah, and then talk to prepare staff on if there's disagreements, especially with offer of FAPE, and not get into what we talk about power struggles, right? Parent wants this, LEA rep is offering this, and again, we know the LEA rep has to be the one who makes the offer of FAPE ultimately, and they also have to be aware of what the services that district can provide. So that's the role of LEA rep, whoever that person is. What to do if there's disagreement. And I've seen enough meetings where that just goes back and forth. It goes back and forth, and everyone gets frustrated. And the parent is getting frustrated. We need to be able to inform our staff if there's disagreement, and don't engage back in a back and forth. Document. We hear your concerns. We're going to document that you disagree with this. So again, preparing staff on what to do and what their options are when there is a disagreement in services, goals, offer a FAPE. Sometimes we get those parents that come in and say, I want 20 goals, 30 goals, which unless there's every related service and everyone's writing 1 or 2 goals, there really shouldn't be more for your typical IEP, 5 or 6 goals, maybe. So just trying to figure out, and again, OAH is pretty clear on this. We are not to write a goal for everything. So we need to find what that balance is. And so I would say that if there's a sticking point where a parent wants an additional goal, then, and it's reasonable, then maybe as a good faith effort, you inform the team. If they want additional goals, 1 is fine. 8 is probably not okay. You don't want a kid with 30 goals. It doesn't make any sense to me.
But that's why it goes back to data. And what does data show? You can always take everything back to data because, I've had parents requesting crazy things like, I don't know, the inability to turn their paper the appropriate way when they're writing or something like that, right? And so they wanted a goal to make sure that his paper was positioned a certain way, with like a 45-degree angle or something crazy like that, right? So it's within reason. What is the data that we have that basically is going to support that there is a need, right? And that's what we need to be working on. So, as soon as you go back to that data, a lot of this can be kind of like flushed out. And it's important also that our goals are cross curriculum. So you're looking at like what might be just for English language arts. Can we write it so that it is appropriate for math? Or, even in math, can we make sure that there is a goal around number sense and it's an automaticity and it's not just 1 for addition, 1 for subtraction, 1 for multiplication, division. So, but again, it's based off of data. And as long as they're preparing that ahead of time, that's something that you can do. I did have a question for you though around staffing. So when you're running staffing meetings, are you talking to staff about a parent in a possible disagreement or what to do in a possible disagreement?
Yeah, and it's, again, when there's disagreement, handle it respectfully, handle it tactfully. Again, what we've been talking about conflict throughout the past few months on the show. Don't take it personal. Calmly, coolly say, we're going to document your concerns and we're going to move on. And make a note in the IEP, the notes that parent is disagreeing with this, and we're going to move on. Because when we get to the next portion of this, how are we documenting that in IEP, and what are the next steps? Parents absolutely have a right to disagree with what we're doing. I would caution during these staffings, don't change your offer if you don't believe in it. And so we've seen filings, we've seen outcomes where districts offer, parent says, I want this. Districts go with that offer, even though they know it's not the offer they want because the data doesn't support that. And then they come back and file saying, well, you knew that was a bad offer of freight, but you did it anyway. And districts got dinged on that. So you want to make sure that you can defend your decision. And as much as I love to do staffings when appropriate, as much as I like to stay out of IEP meetings, because I also feel that's appropriate, there are times where we have to go back to those IEP meetings and do kind of like an audit or do like a quality control and say, well, I see you did this and I see you offered this. However, how did this conversation change and what data did you use to support that decision? And we take those as learning experiences and they're after the fact learning experience. I try to not intervene with like saying, well, now you got to redo that. Although I will say, if I feel that there's a violation of parent participation, I will say you guys need to hold an amendment and re-engage a parent and have a conversation, taking parent input into consideration in determining your fate, because what we don't want to see, as much as I want teams to be independent and to build capacity, what I don't want to see is them to shortcut the process or to violate parent rights or student rights. So there are times, unfortunately, when I've seen an outcome of an IEP meeting and I'm like, what just happened here? How did you come to that conclusion? And so then you have to use that as a training opportunity. And whether they did it intentionally or unintentionally, did they manipulate the data, did they not take certain data into account, we still have to hold people accountable and to go back and say, hey, look, I need you to redo this. And if you need me to facilitate that meeting and making sure that we have all of the data that we're taking into consideration. But again, we've been talking about this. We have to self-monitor. And that means that sometimes the decisions that we make are wrong if we don't have the data to support that. So that's part of the process too. Part of the process is that, as a compliance officer, as a director, that we have to go in there and say, look, I don't think this was done right. Can you explain this to me? And if they can explain it and it's valid, that's great. but sometimes they make decisions that with no data to support that will move a kid to a more restrictive setting. And so we need to make sure that they are making informed decisions, not because we don't know how to work with that kid in our classroom, but we're not going to do any behavioral planning. We're going to move that to a more restrictive environment. So we have to monitor that. We have to be the ones that are advocates for our kids, our families, and our staff. And that could be difficult at times, to making sure everyone is getting what they need to be successful.
Yeah. And ultimately, we want to do it before the due process filing comes in, right? Ultimately, we want to have these follow-up conversations before those filings. But unfortunately, with lack of preparation, I feel, that's ultimately what happens. When that team is not on the same page, it becomes very apparent. And that's when you see stuff coming out in filings.
And that's the preparation part of it, right? That's what the point of this first episode is, making sure that people are aware that this is how you make decisions to provide services, to offer FAPE. We need to have a conversation about this process. And you have the data to support this. If you want a non-public school, what data, if you're thinking about a non-public school, what data do you have to support that the kid should be in a non-public school? What supports have you provided on your campus to support behavior? And so those are the questions that need to be asked. And we need to have good answers. And if we don't have good answers, then guess what? Those shouldn't be viable options for a placement. But that's the planning process, right?
Well, it is the planning process. And it would benefit everybody to go through staffings. And like I said, not necessarily just with district office, but if they know that it is going to be an issue, is to come and reach out and do a staffing to get everybody on the same page. The better prepared you are, the more supported the parent is, and the smoother the process is going to be as we kind of navigate the IEP.
Yeah, and I think we've done some trainings of staff where we give them scenarios and say, hey, what do you think about this? And looking at administrators as LEA reps and getting them through that role play of like, hey, here's the data. What looks a little weird about this? And so you can take your own data that you have gathered through the years. You can look at OAH and put some facts there and say, okay, here are the facts of this case. What do you think we should do to try to calibrate? Again, what we want to do is we want to build capacity. We want to develop leaders so that they can be appropriate LEA reps at meetings, so that when we're not around, they can appropriately run those staffing meetings themselves. And I think we've seen some growth over the years with that.
Yep, absolutely. I think after, for some of the groups, they take this model, and if they need us to step in, they do. But for the most part, we're not having to go out there regularly to support meetings or upcoming meetings.
And special departments don't have the bandwidth to do all of this, right? That's the reason why we want to build capacity, because we want to make sure staff members can do this themselves when we feel comfortable that they can run this on their own. So I think it's important that we become experts, and we really have to be experts with this. And we train our staff members to be experts in this. So then ultimately we can do that release of responsibility and have them run these meetings. That's really what it's all about.
And there needs to be one of you and one of me at every single school site, right?
You can't clone me yet. I wish we could clone. No, can't. No one wants to clone. No one wants multiple me's running around. I guarantee you that. But this is a good start.
Yes.
The next episode will be the actual meeting and how that meeting can be run, and taking a look at some of the concerns that we might have actually during those meetings. But that's for the next episode.
That sounds good to me.
All right.
Start.
Thank you very much for joining us. This has been Mosaic Days. I'm Leonard Martinez.
And I'm Allison Smith. Have a good rest of your weekend.
Thank you for joining us.